to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyekolu. Now, a new president of the prestigious international group, the Medical Women's International Association, or WMIA, is taking office this week. The new leader is Dr. Eleanor Nwadinobi, the first Nigerian to be elected to the post in its 100-year history. Dr. Nwadinobi rose through the ranks, first as state president, then national president, then as financial chairperson, and now to the very top of the association's global pecking order as international president. She will shortly gather her deputies from around the world for her first meeting. There have been bumps along the way. The former president resigned before the completion of her term. We'll talk to the new president, Dr. Eleanor Nwadinobi, in a moment. But first, here she is on the sidelines of a United Nations meeting, talking about some of her passions and achievements over the years.
We have been looking at reducing harmful traditional practices against widows, especially in the southeast of Nigeria. And I'm very happy to report that at the sessions that we've had here, I've been able to give feedback in saying that the harmful practices that existed several years ago are now markedly reduced. The practices that are still prevalent are things like disinheritance, forceful shaving of the hair, and varying periods of women being stopped from having the freedom to move around. But by and large, the harmful practices that obtained 15 years ago have reduced, like having to drink the water in which the husband's corpse has been bathed, or like the woman having to lie on the same lying in state bed with her husband. So we do have positive things to report. Concerning the work that I'm doing regarding reduction of conflict, violent conflict in Nigeria, and ensuring that violence against women within the situation of violent conflict is reduced, and ensuring that more women and girls are involved in peace building, we're very happy that the Nigerian government, through the Ministry of Women Affairs, was able to report that they now have a national action plan on UN Security Resolution 1325. So we're very proud that Nigeria is joining the rest of the world, and I think is now the 37th country to have its national action plan 1325.
Dr. Eleanor Nwadinobi there, and she now joins me, of course, as the new international president of the Medical Women's International Association. Dr. Eleanor with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
So the first president in the association's 100-year history. Proud moment for you and for Nigeria.
Yes, indeed. First from Nigeria. The Medical Women's Association, International Association is the oldest, longest existing medical association in the world. When they came into being in 1919, women had peculiar problems because there were very few of us. And so they set up an international association really to look at issues around conditions of work for themselves, inward looking, but outward looking, to also focus on women's global health.
And I presume that over the years,
Yes.
it's become, to some extent, quite activist.
Oh, absolutely. Because of the issues that women face regarding, women's health. So there are issues, for example, around breast and cervical cancers. There are issues around violence against women and girls, as you heard earlier. And then for us as practitioners ourselves, there are issues around work-life balance, mental health, for example. So yes, indeed, we've found our niche.
But just explain to us what the organization is, what it actually does, for people who might not know it, because a lot of people say, wow, this is prestigious. I mean, what is it? Who makes up its membership? Is it just doctors, or are there are nurses and other of medical types in it?
Well, female doctors and dentists, and we are in over 90 countries in the world. and we're divided up into regions. Each region has a vice president, and what the association does as a membership association is each individual member country identifies its priority areas. So, for example, in Nigeria, we have been running cervical and breast cancer screening. We're screening for non-communicable diseases. We have an initiative called the Women's Rights to Health Information campaign, which takes health information, breaks it down to the simplest of forms in local languages, so that our women and girls, especially who are the carers, the bearers, the nurturers in the homes, can break down health information in the way that they can look after themselves, look after their husbands, their children, and members of the household. So you will find out that depending on what the priority issues are in the different regions of the world, that they are regional priorities and there are national priorities.
Right, and that begs the question, what will be your cardinal priorities now that you've assumed leadership of the association?
My cardinal priority will be to put the health of women and girls front and center, to increase our visibility and to also make sure that the policies, plans, actions around the globe are implemented, and also to ensure that there's a mentoring and intergenerational system, that the teeming numbers of female doctors who we now have in the profession, who are more at the lower rungs of the ladder in health institutions, can rise to those leadership positions. So, as I said earlier, there's the inward looking regarding the welfare of our members, and then there's the outward looking, where we provide free health screening in the communities in which we belong, wanting to improve the services that we render, ensuring that training, for example, is improved regarding the recognition of violence against women and girls and where it happens, ensuring that key parameters like the Sustainable Development Goals are achieved through the input that we can make.
Well, let's talk about some of those cardinal objectives that
Yes.
you've got. I mean, you talked about violent conflict in Nigeria, within which there is violence against women.
Indeed.
How do you measure that, and what sort of impact it's having, and how you're going to try and fix that problem?
Yes, it is a hydra-headed problem, hugely challenging, and the issues there are the fact that the prevalent practices of violence against women and girls that you have in relative peacetime are made much worse in conflict. We ourselves, as an association, and I'll give Nigeria as an example, had some of our own members displaced who had to flee, the different conflicts that exist. You understand that conflict also affects the infrastructure, and therefore what they could offer to the citizens by way of professionals was impacted by conflict. But going back to the sorts of violence that women and girls undergo in conflict, as I said, is increased. So where you have prevalent domestic violence, for example, because
Well, you have it everywhere, don't you? I mean,
absolutely, in relative peacetime.
Right.
But then conflict makes it worse. And then you find that there are more, for example, female-headed households. Not to talk of the huge elephant in the room, which is sexual and gender-based violence, and in particular sexual violence against girls who are forcibly abducted, forcibly raped, who are who have children, who are stigmatized, we have widows out of conflict.
But let me ask you this. How would you cope with a situation like that? Because, I mean, there is conflict, for example, in northeast Nigeria.
And in different parts of Nigeria, I might add.
And as well, I mean, you're not just talking about Nigeria, you're the international president.
Absolutely.
So you're looking at every part of the world, including the other parts of Africa, the DRC, all the places where there's conflict, Latin America, and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm just wondering how you would deal with a situation like that.
In the way that we've been dealing with it in our everyday lives as professionals. Some of us are hands-on clinicians, some of us are policy makers, and we're encouraging more of our members to go into policy, because at the end of the day, in order to change things, you absolutely need legislation. You need it to be implemented. You need practitioners to be trained and retrained. We need to be able to provide adequate services that will actually make an impact. So you don't want a situation, for example, where a young girl has been sexually violated and she walks into a clinic and the services are not there, for her to access. So, access to services. So we have an advocacy role, but we also have a practical hands-on role, and we're interested in the training of our members, retraining of our members. For example, one of the issues, again, let me refer to violence against women and girls, is the fact that sometimes you do have practitioners themselves who do not recognize a violence. So if a lady walks into a surgery or a clinic and says, oh, I fell down the stairs and I've broken my arm. We want our members, and part of that is the training, to be able to pick that up immediately so that the response is as quick and as efficient as possible.
Okay, just stay with us because we want to talk to you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the first Nigerian to be elected to the prestigious post of President of the Medical Women's International Association in its 100-year history. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyagolu. Now, as you may have heard, Dr. Eleanor Nwadinobi has emerged as the first Nigerian president of the Medical Women's International Association, or MWIA, in its 100-year history. Dr. Nwadinobi was first inaugurated as president-elect at the MWIA Centenary Congress, which was held in July in New York. She's now become president after the unanimous endorsement of the Executive Committee at the beginning of this month, following the resignation of the immediate past president, who is from the UK. Dr. Nwadinobi is a medical doctor and a health, gender and human rights expert, and she is with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
I think I first encountered you professionally in your very commendable work with widows in eastern Nigeria a few years ago. Some fairly disturbing practices which you were trying to help eliminate. You were up against strong traditions. Where do things stand as far as that goes now?
Oh, I'm so glad to say that, those practices that were prevalent when I started in the mid-90s, something that coincided with, several women going to Beijing, the famous Beijing conference, and next year will be 25 years since Beijing. So when we started, we were looking at harmful traditional practices against widows in the Southeast. And I was, faced with this issue when, a friend of mine, we happened to go and visit her at her homestead when she was bereaved. And sadly, we walked right past her, not recognizing her, because she was sitting outside on the floor. She hadn't had a bath for a fairly long time. She hadn't combed her hair, wearing rags. And I couldn't understand what on earth that was all about. And I was told, oh, well, that was the practice. And, you know, I had this burden wondering, well, you know, what sorts of women, you know, undergo this practice in the Southeast.
So the practice was to have her sit on the floor?
On the floor. And when I say on the floor, this was on bare earth.
Right, and that's
right?
the tradition.
And in that particular village,
right,
in the mid-90s, that was the tradition. So with some very dedicated women alongside myself, we started an organization called the Widows Development Organization. And at that time, the word widow was taboo. You mentioned it and people thought immediately that it brought bad luck. So we purposely gave the acronym WIDO, Widows International Development Organization, so that people would pronounce the acronym and we would, you know, dispense with the taboo. And, you know, we got together, we did some independent research in the southeast of Nigeria, and, you know, I came up with, you know, what I then called the 3 Ds, the dethronement that showed that, you know, a girl is elevated to a status by virtue of marriage. And then the very reason for which she's been elevated and enthroned, her husband, when he dies, the woman was made to sit either on the bare earth, on the floor, or on a mattress, signifying a dethronement. That was the first D. The second one was the fact that the woman was not supposed to look decent in any way if she was mourning. So the shaving off of her hair, you know, which is a thing of every woman's beauty, not to have her bath for varying periods of time, to wear, you know, either dark clothing. We actually, in some villages, women were made to wear rags. And then the third D was disinheritance, where whatever the woman owned alongside her husband was forcefully taken from her. Well, working alongside some very, very strong organizations, activists, and especially the Nigerian Association of Women Journalists, a law was passed in the state where we first did our work, Enugu State. And that was the first state in Nigeria in 2001, shortly after we came into democracy, to pass a law outlawing widowhood practices. Today, thankfully, we have what is called the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015 that addresses, you know, a full spectrum of harmful practices as well as other types of violence. So we have come from when women were drinking the bath water in which their husbands' corpses were bathed and having to lie in state with their husbands, to a situation where, as you saw in the clip, we are still dealing with disinheritance. We're still dealing with women who are being confined.
Well, some of the more gruesome practices
the more
have come to an end.
I'm glad to say that in the 25-year period in which we've done this work, and, you know, other states have come up with similar laws, but certainly the VAP Act is a good one. The sad thing about the VAP Act is that it's only got its jurisdiction in the Federal Capital Territory, and therefore we are urging.
So there's still work to be done.
There's lots of work.
Well, it certainly sounds that in your new incarnation as the president of the MWIA, Medical Women's International Association, that you are going to be devoting a lot of your time to issues in the developing world.
Oh, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that, you know, my work will be restricted to the developing world. As I said earlier, you do have issues that are of utmost priority in the developed world. One of the key things now is mental health. And so being the international president means that whilst still, you know, making impact locally, that impact also has to translate globally in a way that one is inclusive in you know, the work that we do, be it advocacy, be it, you know, the practical work. etc. And it's serendipitous that, you know, this has happened at a time when all over the world we are in what we call the 16 days of activism around violence against women and girls, with the theme Orange the World, and we're talking about, you know, reducing rape. So that's why I'm in orange today. But one of the key things to say is, even though we've got 16 days dedicated to increased awareness, we have to be aware 365 days of the year as to what women and girls go through just for being women and girls.
And of course, here you are, you're now the first Nigerian president of the group in its 100-year history.
Correct. That's correct.
Why has it been that way? I mean, obviously it's a significant thing to crow about, the fact that you've become sort of the president, but why has it taken that long?
Well, I guess there you know, varying reasons. The first thing to say is I'm not the first African.
You're the first Nigerian.
I'm the first Nigerian. Right. So the Kenyans got there before us, the Ghanaians got there before us, but we eventually woke up. I'm sure you know of a southeastern proverb that says, paraphrasing now, when you wake up is your morning. So Nigeria has woken up.
Right.
The fact that, you know, when we go to the international meetings, we're usually the largest group at the meetings, and now we've woken up to the fact that, yes, indeed, you know, we can have that leadership position, and I'm so grateful to God that, you know, it happens to be me.
Well, we're very proud of you, of what you've achieved. But other issues beyond widows and so on, you talked about cervical cancer, for example. I mean, that's become a big problem. Cancer in general in Africa, but particularly for women, breast and cervical cancer is a big issue. We did a big program here the other day about the fact that it's now exceeding malaria as the biggest killer in many parts of Africa, including Nigeria, and you can use things as basic as vaccination,
absolutely,
right, to get rid of it.
It's preventable, and that's why.
So a lot of awareness on your part. You have to do a lot of publicity,
and that's why I told you that we have this initiative that, in fact, has been borrowed by other countries as a good practice, called the Women's Rights to Health Information. So, you know, ensuring that health information is out there in a way that people can understand quite quickly and easily. So the awareness is important, but the awareness is not everything. We also have to have affordable services. The HPV vaccine is not free, it's not readily available.
So there's a lot of work to be done,
and especially in the rural areas.
Okay. Dr. Eleanor Nwadinobi, the new international president of the Medical Women's International Association, the first Nigerian to occupy that post in 100 years. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, that's it for this edition of The Arise Interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja and London. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.